two books that I would suggest you read, okay? One is Emerging Real Estate Markets by David Lindahl, and the other is Big Shifts Ahead, not Big Shit Ahead, but Big Shifts Ahead, maybe the same thing, by John Burns, okay? Both of those books provide awesome information and metrics to consider when choosing a market, right? So that being said, though, I'm going to do a deep dive into market cycles with you right now, okay? At any given point, a market is in one of four different phases, okay? One of a metro area, right, is in one of these four different phases. A seller's one, a seller's two, or a buyer's one, right, and a buyer's two. So in a seller's market, the demand is typically greater than the supply, right, which just makes it a lot easier for the seller to find a buyer at that point. That demand will drive cap rates down, but it will which ultimately drives purchase prices up, right? So in short, a seller's market occurs when there's a rise in the real estate market here, right? And a buyer's market is going to occur when there's a dip, right? When there's a fall, because during a fall, you're going to see a lot of apartment owners who try to sell at the exact same time, and that results in the supply then outweighing the demand. I'm going to go into more detail about essentially what to look out for, but we obviously want to buy down here, right? We want to buy down here and then ride the wave back up. That's the whole point. So a full cycle from tip to tip here is about 12 to 15 years, and then the time in between each phase is about 3 to 5 years. So for example, in the beginning of 2020, right, we were up here. We were in the late stages of a seller's market one, right? The late stages. So, before, coronavirus started running amok, we were all preparing for a downturn at that point. Obviously nobody could have expected or predicted, the master reset that the coronavirus pandemic caused, but we were preparing for that, right? And what I mean by master reset, there are typically 8 to 20 emerging markets at any given time, meaning metro areas that we would consider an emerging market right down here. But because of the master reset that was caused from all the jobs lost in 2020, that number turned into like 50 plus emerging markets. So historically, the markets that move the quickest after a downturn are some major markets. Major markets like DC, Minneapolis, New York, Boston, Orlando, right? Some other major markets as well, Dallas, right? But the strategy now, right, is to research the areas that have been hit the hardest by the coronavirus, because those areas, and focus on those areas, because those are the areas where owners are going to have the most problems for us to solve. And remember, our job is to essentially solve problems. So those types of strategies will change continually, right, depending on what's happening in the market. But the basics of market cycles is fairly consistent. And that's what we're going to talk about today, okay? So let's go into a seller's market one and go through some of the key indicators of a seller's market one, with that understanding in mind. So some of the key indicators here, okay? Supply of properties starts to dwindle, right? So meaning, properties on the market begin to dwindle down, right? Meaning there's not enough properties, there's a lot of demand, right? Which is why it's rising. Foreclosures begin to decrease in number. Properties are starting to sell fast. At this point, there's typically a very low unemployment rate in the market as well. So that increase in job growth, right, also increases the demand, which means vacancy starts to compress and tighten, which allows owners to really increase and drive rents up. And that also results in now higher prices, right? So prices now begin to rise at this point, right? So that extra, demand for housing causes construction starts to accelerate. People start to overbuild at this point. In fact, there's such a demand that instead of rehabbing properties, it makes more sense a lot of the times to just tear down existing properties and rebuild new properties instead, right? So existing properties torn down and rebuilt. In other words, demand is at its highest point within a seller's market one. There's a lot of demand here. Now the strategy is to buy and flip. It's the only phase of the market, the only stage of the market, right, that you can do both buy and hold and flip. Because there's still enough room, essentially, still enough room to hold for appreciation, but there's also still enough demand at this point to do a quick turn, right? But you have a couple options, essentially, right, in a seller's market one. Now a seller's market 2 as it progresses into there, right? The strategy here is going to be to cash out and reinvest into another market down here, right, before it rolls over. We need to do that before the cycle, rolls over into a buyer's market 1. So we're not going to wait till we get to the tip here, right? We're going to, here when there's still enough demand, to sell the property. We want to sell out before it rolls over when the demand is still high, right? Because of that, we need to, be looking for indicators that the market is starting to slow down. So let's go into some of the indicators of a seller's market too. So time on market starts to increase, meaning that a property will sit on the market for longer, which means also number of properties on the market begins to increase. Rents begin to plateau at this point. You'll see as you're researching new properties, you're going to see that the prices are fairly inflated, meaning the numbers just don't work. You're also going to see overbuilding. There's a lot of building going on, right? Investors are also starting to buy properties on speculation, meaning that they're not buying off of cash flow. They're buying off of, hey, this cash flow isn't very good, but they're banking on appreciation, right? Foreclosures are also typically low at this point, but they're still steady. And then lastly, job growth starts to slow. Now the strategy once again is you're going to sell off right at this point and roll those funds over into another emerging market, right? Like we talked about. So you're going to roll them down from here, right? You want to roll them into a new market. Now a buyer's market 1 here, right? So it rolls over, right? Buyer's market 1, things are starting to fall at this point. Prices are falling, rents are falling, demand's at its lowest level, as a bunch of sellers are looking to exit all at once, right? So as things are falling down here. Now some key indicators of a seller or of a buyer's market 1. If unemployment, right, starts to increase, there's an excess of supply, which causes the time on the market to be at its longest stage. There's inventory just sitting idle, and most of the time those properties have some sort of deferred maintenance because owners are just holding on. So there's some maintenance that we need to do when we come into the property. At this point, you're going to see also a sharp uptick in foreclosures as sellers start to struggle. New construction starts to stagnate. It's also overpriced. The strategy, right, here is to buy for cash flow only, period. You're going to have to weather a bit of a plateau, right, before you can start to aggressively, increase your rents, which means the property has to be profitable at acquisition, not after. Okay, so that's how we buy in a buyer's market 1. Now, a buyer's market 2, okay, this is where you're going to start to see the most amount of motivated sellers. This is obviously where we want to buy, but you're going to see the most amount of motivated sellers because they just went through a downturn here, right? This is also where you'll see the least amount of competition. But most importantly, this is where you're going to see the most upside potential for, equity and growth. And man, I'll say this, one big property in a buyer's market 2 will make you wealthy. It will absolutely, completely change your wealth portfolio. Multiple properties, 2 big properties in an emerging market, buyer's market 2, and you'll begin to be in a position to retire next generations. Even more properties than that, future generations are giving you credit for their success. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. So some key indicators here though, okay? How to identify a buyer's market 2. The biggest key indicators are obviously growth. Things are starting to pick back up. Time on the market starts to decrease, right? That, companies come in, they begin to announce a bunch of new jobs. Those jobs obviously bring in demand. Other companies want to build around those companies. So job announcements start to increase, prices start to increase, right? All that demand, that begins to absorb the oversupply. So now prices and rents are beginning to slowly, increase at this point. And you start to see existing properties, being rehabbed, right? Because owners now have some capital to be able to do that. Your foreclosure competition starts to become high because as the numbers start to decline, right? There's still a lot of people wanting to take advantage of foreclosures, but the numbers start to decline. So your strategy is to buy with both hands, man, and ride the wave. You buy everything. You buy with both hands and you ride the wave. I feel like my portfolio changed drastically in a year. And that was after buying in the early stages of a seller's market 1. And it did change in a year, but man, 6 years in, I mean, it's crazy and humbling to, look back and see that growth. Sincerely, it is super humbling, which is just one of the reasons I freaking love teaching others about it. So listen, on a side note, you be excited for what you're pursuing right now, man. When you stay dedicated to executing on a daily basis, you'll look back 2, 3, 5 years from now and be in a completely different position. It really is an amazing thing, and I'm excited for you to pursue it. Okay, along those lines, okay, there's also, I want to talk to you about the 4 major market influences. So, essentially the 4 things that will influence each of the markets that we're in. You have, essentially I'll say this: generations, change over time, right? And they change due to government policies, economic cycles, right? New technology that comes in, and also shifts in societal norms is a big one as well. So these 4 major influences, man, they will change the future just like they changed the past. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a few of these. Let's go into government first. Some examples of how they've shaped the past to give you, some insight to that. Government, laws and programs and investments at the federal, state, and even local levels will it changes society, more than most probably realize. For example, through the GI Bill, as well as highway expansions, like investments into highway expansions, the federal government boosted home ownership by 18% from 1940 to 1960. That's crazy, okay? Currently, low state government income tax, those government income tax policies have begun to shift population growth south. Local government redevelopment investments, also have revitalized some urban areas, right? So government is a big factor there. Also the economy. Now, economic growth, good or bad, shapes generations. So for example, those born in the 1950s are retiring as one of the most affluent generations ever. And a lot of that is due to, in part to, falling interest rates that boosted their investment values just at the right time. And on the flip side of that, you have the 1970s. Those who were born in the 1970s, those individuals have far less net worth and home ownership at their age than any group in the past 40 years. And that's due largely in part to, they were hit the hardest by foreclosures, right? Their generation was hit the hardest during the recession. Many of them had just purchased starter homes for their young families. A lot of them had, borrowed the entirety of the purchase price, the purchase amount, so they got hit hard there. Another one, right, those born in the 1980s, millennials, right, the timing of the Great Recession in the 2000s, as well as the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, that is projected to lead to millennials retiring with the lowest net worth of any generation since the Great Depression, right? So those kind of things impact, generations for sure. Now, technology is also huge. Mass-produced cars, as an example, and highway expansions as well, made suburban living more doable, causing household growth to now flow in that direction. So technology also, wiped out manufacturing jobs. It now threatens knowledge workers as well. Life expectancy has also doubled, almost more than doubled over the last century. That's obviously thanks in part to, crazy progress in the health and technology field. But in my opinion, the internet and computer chip have to qualify as the most obvious transformative technologies of recent decades, right? That technology has impacted us a bunch of ways. But one of those ways, right, it's enabled far more telecommuting. Telecommuting has been heightened even more due to the coronavirus pandemic, right? As people can now work from home. For example, our company, Multifamily Mindset, we have employees all over the U.S. I'm obviously here in Hawaii. Todd, one of the other founders is in Utah, as well as a couple other employees are also out in Utah. Ryan, who's one of the other founders, who I'm sure every one of you know, lives in Florida. And then we have other employees who are in South Carolina, North Carolina, and even California, right? So we have them all over the place. So Americans now move every 9 years compared to every 6 years, because this ability to telecommute has caused us to be able to live where we want to live, which allows us to move less than we used to, right? Once again, we now move every 9 years instead of 6. So these Technology changes, and then societal shifts. Societal shifts is another big one. So divorces is an example. Divorces tripled from the 1950s to the 1980s. That caused a number of societal shifts from societal norms. The pressure to marry before 25 turned into maybe wait a little bit, right? In fact, today more women are more likely to have a child before they get married than after. Ultimately, that has caused delays in marriage and in childbirth, right? So to help you understand this, the 4-5-6 rule, okay, the 4-5-6 rule for demographic prediction goes like this. The four major influences that we just talked about, they impact each generation differently depending on when they happen, right? Whether it's childhood, early career, family formation, late career, retirement. So whenever it happens. So these four major influences, government policies, economic conditions, technological advances, societal shifts, during people's 5 major life, stages, help answer 6 key consumer questions. How much money will investors have? What will they purchase? Will they choose to purchase, right? When will they make these purchases? Where will they, live and spend their money? And then who will they live with and, share money and expenses with and housing with? And why will they buy certain products and not others? Right? It impacts us on a deeper level than we realize. So some of the biggest opportunities that are happening right now, let's go through a couple of these. Number one is women. Okay, women now earn 58% of all college degrees. They also earn more than their spouse 38% of the time. We just mentioned too, they have children later and more often alone. And the stat that I read, by 2025, it's expected that 78 million women will be in the workforce. That's 8 million more than there was in 2015 for comparison. Retirees, and I'll explain why all this matters too, but retirees, people who age 65 or older will increase by more than 18 million between 2015 and 2025. That's a 38% increase. That increases from 48 million in 2015 to 66 million in 2025. Crazy growth. And then young adults, okay, those born from 1989 to 1993, they constitute the largest 5-year age group in the country. So in 2020, these individuals still live at home or crowd into apartments more than any other generation before them at the same age. But that being said, okay, they will lead the formation of 12.5 million households from 2015 to 2025. That's 86% more households than were created in the prior 10 years. It's pretty crazy. Okay, now, most importantly, why in the world all of that even matters? Okay, listen, we are, we're in the housing business, which means we absolutely care about the future of housing, and there are 3 big shifts happening right now in regards to living preferences. Okay, so let's talk about it. Number one is rentals. And I know you already realize this, but home ownership has clearly declined in importance. It just is dropped. Currently, home ownership is at the lowest level that's been at in like the past 40 years or something, and it's projected to decline, even further to less than 61% by 2025. It's obviously very good for us because we provide rentals. But this has been caused by a couple things, right? There was the housing crisis in the late 2000s that heightened the risk of home ownership to a younger population who's now in adulthood. But because of that, they saw the risks, and they lacked enough confidence in their job to take on a 30-year mortgage commitment. And then that coronavirus pandemic only escalated that. I mean, it wiped out the economy right as millennials were starting to feel just a little bit more secure. Shit got wiped out, right? It affected them, which will cause home ownership to go down, rentals to go up. It's good for us. Also is the South, okay? The South, well, I mentioned, growth continues to flow south toward the affordable sunshine states. So states like California, and the Northeast and the Midwest, they'll continue to grow at a very slow rate, where, the southern regions, 42% of Americans currently live in the South, but the southern regions are expected to welcome 62% of U.S. household growth from 2015 to 2025. That's probably even escalated with the coronavirus. Once again, state tax and growth policies determine in a very large part where Americans decide to live. And then number 3 is suburban and urban areas, okay? Suburban and urban areas. So with marriage and childbirth rates declining, people don't need as much space or want as much space, right? But they do want to be as close to the action as possible. But not so close, right, that they can't go outside if there just happens to be a global pandemic, right? So apartments in strategic locations that provide, easy access to restaurants, entertainment, outdoor activities is huge. An easy commutes in if they need to go into town will be in very, very high demand continually.